Welcome to Diabetes Day by Day, the American Diabetes Association's official podcast. November is American Diabetes Month, and we join the American Diabetes Association in honoring those living with diabetes, prediabetes, and their families. In today's episode, we'll be sharing personal stories and practical insights on what it means to have an abundance mentality while living with diabetes. The term abundance mentality was coined by Dr. Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It is a great book. I highly recommend it. Still relevant today, over 30 years later. Abundance mentality means that human success and potential is expansive, and that this potential can be realized by anyone. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't take hard work, determination, and collaboration with others. Good outcomes usually do, but what we can do is expansive. And Dr. Covey contrasted that to a scarcity mentality, that idea that there's never enough and that whatever you have has to be held on to and not shared with others, or there won't be enough left for you in general. The research shows that those with an abundance mentality do better, are more satisfied with their lives, and actually live longer. I'm Dr. Neil Skolnik, professor of family and community medicine in the Sidney Kimmel Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University. And joining me today is my co-host.
Thanks, Neil. I'm Dr. Sara Wettergreen, an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Skaggs School of Pharmacy and an ambulatory care clinical pharmacist.
Sarah, we are privileged to have two guests joining us today that have also been guests before, and we are thrilled to welcome them back. The first is Marina Chaparro, who is a certified diabetes care and education specialist and founder of Nutrichicos, a bilingual nutrition practice specializing in children and family nutrition. Marina also lives with type 1 diabetes, and the messages she has shared on previous podcasts about abundant living were actually the inspiration for today's episode. Welcome back, Marina.
Always such a joy to be with you today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And next is Aaron Sutton, who is a licensed social worker and is a behavioral health faculty at the Family Medicine Residency Program at Jefferson Health, Abington. He also serves as the Chief Wellness Officer for graduate medical education there. Welcome back, Aaron.
Neil, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
I'm going to start off by just expressing gratitude for having you both back on the podcast. I know that Sarah and I learned so much from the things that you shared previously that we crossed our fingers and invited you back, and we're thrilled when you agreed to come back, because I know everybody is really busy. Marina, can you start by sharing, what does an abundance mentality mean to you, and specifically also, what does it mean to you in the context of your diabetes?
Neil, when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 16, I was only told what I couldn't do. I could no longer have tortillas. I could no longer have sugar. It was always what I couldn't do. And even to this day, right? You Google diabetes. What do you see? Amputations, fear. You see sometimes shame. And I think the word diabetes, my diagnosis, was just felt very heavy and felt surrounded by a lot of shame of what I couldn't have. And I think sometimes we as providers tend to focus on avoid this, don't eat that. But I think over my 14 plus years of practice and actually living with this condition, I would get asked this question. They would ask me, what do you think are the successful tips for managing diabetes? And for me, I'm not just managing my diabetes, right? I'm living. I need to find a way to be thriving because this is my life. And I think a key component, and when we always talk about the diets and nutrition, we say the most successful one is the one that you're able to maintain. And I'm not able to maintain a successful diabetes if I don't have joy in my life. If I have a chronic condition that will be with me for the rest of my life, as is in the case of type 1 diabetes, I need to find a way of making peace with it, of making it my buddy, and really finding a way to enjoy it. Otherwise, there's absolutely no way I could be just managing it or surviving it. So I think that shift in perspective has really changed the way I practice and the way I live with my own diabetes.
Aaron, I'm interested in your thoughts on hearing that because I know you work with a lot of people who, some of whom have diabetes, some of whom have other chronic diseases. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the word, Marina, that was so well spoken the way you said that. And I think the word that really speaks out to me is still finding joy. I think oftentimes we think about the things that we can't do. And Neil, you talked about the abundance mindset in contrast to what is called a scarcity mindset. And when we look at a scarcity mindset, we're not only talking about things we can't do, the actual physical things, but we think about things like love, right? We think about those non-tangible things. So when we talk about the abundance part and we listen to joy that Marina said so eloquently, we think about how can we foster that more in our life? And again, it's contrasting to not what we can't do, but what we can do. And I think that's a lot of where that gratitude comes into play.
I'm struck as I listen, Marina, that some of this comes from a natural attitude, some of it comes from things you've learned. And it isn't surprising that you went into a field where you share the knowledge you acquired through your own experience with others. Is there something that is, we know that we talk that abundance mindset is part of it is thinking that there's enough to share. I forget who said it. It might have been Thomas Jefferson that when one candle lights another, it doesn't extinguish the first candle, but it creates more light for everybody. Did your own experience influence you in going into a field where you help others and is helping others part of what brings you joy?
For me, I think diabetes gave me purpose. And I think that was part of my reshifting my mindset. But there's so many things that I've learned because of my diabetes. And I always make this kind of letter to myself each World Diabetes Day because I've learned so much. And I think one of the biggest joys that I've been able to get from this chronic condition is purpose and helping other families change the narrative in what diabetes is, right? So diabetes, it doesn't define you. It's going to take a lot of changing different pathways in how you do things and how you view the world. You just happen to have a lazy pancreas, right? It's just, I always say, your pancreas is a little bump and we're just going to have to do a little adjustments. So it changes the narrative from, I am this chronic condition. I am, as we would say in previous worlds, diabetic. No, I'm not diabetic. I am Marina Chaparro. I'm a mom. I'm a sister. I'm a wife. I just happen to have a lazy pancreas with type 1 diabetes. That's it.
That's so important. The language we use influences the way we think, switching from I am to I have, and that becomes a part of the many things that we all are. I want to follow up on something you said that each World Diabetes Day, you write a letter to yourself. And Aaron, can you talk a little bit about the value of writing things down, of journaling, of writing a letter to yourself, and ways that we can, if we don't naturally have an abundance mentality, how we can learn a little bit to shift toward that?
I think the act of writing in itself, and there's a lot of research about the act of actually putting a pen to paper. But what do we write? What comes out of this? And I think that, as Marina said, she already has that prompt of it's diabetes month, and I'm going to write this letter to myself. Here's what I'm grateful for. And that's what I really encourage people to do in writing is sometimes I think we feel stuck, so we can actually have prompts. We can have prompts such as what made me smile today? or what strengths did I use today as I am fighting this challenge? What strength do I have in facing this adversity? I love writing letters, and I think that early on in my career, I started talking to people about writing letters and to the fact that we don't even have to send this letter. This can just be the simple act of writing this down. And that can also help as we think about things like meditation, right? During meditation, we try to visualize things that are good in our life, things like relationships, opportunities. We visualize them and we associate them with things like feeling of being warm and the positive emotions that come with it. So as we're writing these things down in our journal, we can often feel those same qualities come back as we're writing.
Now, Aaron, I want to follow up on something you said, prompts, because I think it's important for people to realize that during the day, as we go through the day, we don't always attend to everything equally. And if someone says something in a mean way to me, I'm just focused on that all day long. I can't get it out of my head. Why did they say that mean? And can you talk a little bit to the importance of writing around a particular topic? You said gratitude, because we could equally choose to write about the things that made us angry today, and it probably wouldn't have a good effect on us. How, how do you use prompts, and how do they help you through your day?
Neil, a word I use a lot is advantageous, right? And when I think about things that we do for us that are advantageous, when we think about either that person or that situation or incident that made us angry, what advantage does that play for us as we continue to have that tape playing through our head? I think it's easy because I think that emotional charge is there as we're thinking about this. Wow, this really flared up. And I think it's easy for us. We talk about things like mental filtering a lot in cognitive therapy, near this, where we let all the good things start to fall down and we focus on all the bad things because that's what brings the emotion out. And it's reasonable. I understand it. It brings up a certain response. Yet I also believe that there's a lot more positive things that happen in our life. And that when we continue to think about those and we write prompts about those things that went well, they will help us advantageously as we think about ways to go and tackle things that, again, when those emotions come up that may be difficult, we have those, you know what, I have this really good mindset of I know I can do things that are hard. And when this emotion comes up, I can combat that as well.
I love having these tools in our toolbox. It almost feels like a life hack to me of sometimes I think we all have a tendency to have days where you're more positive or less positive. And when you're stuck in that rut, what are the things that you can actually go to get out of it? And maybe the tool you go to that day is gratitude and make that more of a habit and a practice. One thing I am interested in, because I read a lot about happiness research and these natural tendencies people have in this positive versus more negative mindset, is I think as a culture, we do tend to focus on those with a positive mindset. But I also want to just emphasize for listeners of if you are someone where you're thinking and you're listening to this and observing, I maybe tend to be more in this negative side. I want to work to be more positive, also see the benefits of that sometimes more critical mindset. I love working with people who sometimes have that mindset because if I'm reviewing a research paper or doing my work with them, they're going to find different things in that were errors compared to what I would have seen. I just might have read it and said, looks good. And they're being that more critical eye. There's also evidence to show that those with a more negative natural mindset tend to be more creative and are sometimes are authors or artists. So we want to embrace the sides of those that are things that contribute to the world too, while also thinking about where does this positive mindset serve us well. So embracing all those sides of you. And if you're already naturally more positive, that's amazing too. And maybe you already have some of these areas in practice. But I really like what you're talking about, Aaron, in terms of the advantageous elements of this. Seeing what's advantageous about both of those elements of mindset, but also working toward that positive as we go toward that focus on abundance mentality. One thing that your comments made me think of was the momentum of that too. I often think it's hard when you're already in that negative mindset to start a new practice or start researching what are ways to increase my gratitude or this abundance mentality. It's nice when you already have these habits in place and can keep that momentum going and keep your habits going to pull you out of those days that might feel a little bit more funky. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
And I think you said a word, Sarah, that I want to really emphasize. It's a practice, right? And this is something that is not called the perfection of gratitude, right? We're never going to perfect it. We're going to have days that are harder than others, right? And I often say we've made it through every bad day we've ever had. Even in doing so, we can look at and say, what was difficult on those days and how did I overcome this? And have gratitude for that ability in ourselves to overcome that. And sometimes just that in itself is that, hey, you know what? I'm really grateful for the ability to overcome that.
And I think part of that, when I think back to living with diabetes, is thinking about all those different daily activities you do as someone living with diabetes, the food management, the exercise, taking your medications, and finding ways to infuse those with joy. If you don't like running as your form of movement, what do you like? Which one brings you joy, and how can you make that the practice? Marina, I'd love to hear from you on how you've taken this abundance mindset to infuse the joy into your daily life of living with diabetes.
And you also said something really interesting. It's about knowing yourself, right? And I think the more you know yourself, what's going to work for you. And so I always said, finding the things that, even the small things that are going to just ground you. For me, it's exercise. For me, exercise is, and it's not all type of exercise. I found sometimes yoga, I found running, and I found some strength training because I want to feel strong. But for me, exercise is my way of releasing that darkness that I have inside. But I think it's also, like you said, it's finding the things that give you joy and also finding things that are going to work with your personality. So if I'm naturally a very positive person, but like you said, if you know that you're not like that, or if you need more control, or if we don't do very well in just going with the flow, it's finding the tools that will give you what you need, whether it's the structure, whether it's the relaxation, whether it's the venting. So I think a lot of diabetes in general, it's about self-discovery. And even the same thing with food. It's what works with you in terms of carb and raising your blood sugar might not work for the other. So the more you can reflect on who you are, on your blood sugars, on what you need, I think you're just going to have better results in general. This could apply for life.
It's interesting as I listen, it's not about just positive thinking because that's in many ways we intuitively know it's a lie. If something's tough, we can't just think it's good. But it's about, Marina, as you said, knowing yourself, acknowledging that this might be a challenge. I have diabetes. There's things I need to do. But then there's an and I can do them, and I can ask others for help, and there's a clinical pharmacist available who can help me go over the details, and my doctor is available, and I have a family. If I need a psychologist, I can pull in someone like Aaron. There's all these resources, and there is this reality of some life is tough. Life has hard things. And we also have aspects of beauty and relationships with others that can help us with that. Aaron?
And Neil, I think that I've actually used that same example in working with patients because a lot of the criticism about different types of psychology is that it is a positive mindset, and a positive mindset in the face of something that is real, because having diabetes is real. This is a real thing. This is hard. And I love that analogy of choosing your hard. I've talked about this with a lot of patients, that it is hard to live with diabetes, right? It is also hard to be on a diet that is going to help you manage your blood sugar. Both those things are true, and they are both hard, and we have to choose our hard. And I think that what we look at is we write down in each corner here of this battle, and choosing each one, like you said, is what do I have in my corner here? And lots of times I think it's easy to say, I don't have this. But I think if we incorporate this positive mindset with gratitude, we look at choosing the hard that has a lot more in our corner. And those are people like Marina, who has this experience with diabetes, who can help us in leaning into that.
I'm thinking too, in terms of this abundance versus scarcity mindset that we've talked about, of in the frame of diabetes, and as you recognized, Aaron, uh, diabetes can be hard to live with. There's a lot to it. And Marina knows that better than anyone here. She can tell us a little bit more there. But I feel like you could either make the choice to spend your days wishing away, wishing you didn't have diabetes, saying, why me? Why do I have to be the one who has this? Or you can think about, what is this teaching me? What other skills do I have? How is this encouraging me to exercise more and live healthier? And how does that helping my vitality in the long run? I think about that from a day-to-day perspective too. Let's say you have one day where your glucose is higher. And I know Aaron's talked about this on other podcasts with us before. Do you then just say, oh, forget the whole week. We'll start over next week. I'll eat whatever the rest of the day, the weekend, whatever. No, that's more of that scarcity mindset convincing you that one day ruined everything for you. In that abundance mentality, we're thinking of we have many days. One day that's a higher glucose day, or maybe even you're having lows or more of a roller coaster day. That's one day in the whole scheme of your life. And what can I do to help move things forward? Marina, I'd love to hear your insights on how you've managed those feelings day to day.
Yeah, diabetes is hard, right? I think I have two brains. I have my diabetes brain, where I am thinking about what I'm going to eat, my blood sugar, carbs, hormone stress, constant automatic decisions. And then I have like my other brain, which is I'm a mom, right? I have to take care of my kids. I'm a professional, and I'm not going to be 100% in both. And sometimes I choose to prioritize, right? But I think in the world of diabetes, it's so hard to accept the things that you can't control. And I find it especially hard for people that are type A, because in the world of diabetes, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. You can have the same meal every day with the same carbohydrates, same insulin, and your blood sugars will not be the same. And so that concept of even letting go, of surrendering to sometimes the unknown is very hard, because we sometimes, especially, and I say we because I work a lot with parents, and parents want to control, as they would, everything in that child's blood sugar. And it could be so exhausting because you don't look at diabetes a year from now. You look at it tomorrow. And if you have a bad day, it could ruin you. And so I think my job is to get them away from this so subjective in mentality and say, we're playing the long game here. You need to see this as a long game, a long journey. And we can't obsess over every single blood sugar or carbohydrate. And I can tell you, I remember vividly when I was first diagnosed, every time my blood sugar would go into the 250, 300, I would see my legs being amputated. That is what I saw. I said, my blood sugar's in the 300. Oh my God, I'm going to go blind. And I share this story with my families, and sometimes it just brings tears to the eyes, saying, yes, like I'm afraid because every time I see my kid's blood sugar in the 300, I think I failed as a parent. So I think it's just so hard, that burden of every single day decisions, that sometimes you have to take a more objective mindset and say, we're in the long game, right? 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, X amount of days of having higher blood sugars it's not going to be the end of you. It's not going to cause blindness. And sometimes I share the data of what we know. But again, it's also what we've heard, right? Diabetes causes amputation. So I think it's changing the narrative and starting to focus more on the objective, on the long game, and not dwelling on every single carb that you're going to eat. Otherwise, you're going to burn yourself out in a week, in a month.
It's a great point. Aaron, your thoughts?
I think that what I hear a lot, and I think Marina said it very well, is self-criticism, right? Because we are fueling ourselves, and this is the outcome from fueling ourselves. And I think we have to change, and Marina did it without really describing what I like to call it, which is going from self-criticism to self-kindness. Because self-kindness, people who are more kind to themselves, they're less likely to experience guilt and shame, which can erode motivation. So it actually changes that into as looking at, like she said, the long game, having kindness to ourselves, that there's a lot of ups and downs that happen with diabetes, and it's the long game. It's not the day to day.
It's the term perfectionism is often used, and there's this paradox because on the one hand, we have to stay on things. We need to do a good job, yet at the same time, if we aim for perfect, we end up being dis inevitably disappointed because we can't achieve that. Aaron, I'm curious how you help people reconcile those two truths.
And I think that one thing I love to do, Neil, is define the terms. So when somebody says, I have to be perfect, I sit down and ask them what perfect means, right? Because I think it's a misconception of what perfection is, right? It might be, I need my blood sugars to be in this area. Okay, well, what about other parts of your life? So if we're actually giving so much attention to this, what are we not being grateful for? As we think about this, and we're 2 weeks away from Thanksgiving, and we talk a lot about being in these environments with a lot of food and being around a lot of people and changing that perfection to, you know what, I can perfect these conversations that I'm having with loved ones around this time of year, because what a wonderful time of year. And not to focus so much on the food that I can't have or that I would enjoy having, but make it more about the total experience. So changing that perfection mindset to let's look at this from a totality of things and see what we can really make that is good and perhaps not perfect.
It makes me think of that idea of reframing. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. And I just saw in a different area such a wonderful example of this recently. Aaron, one of our colleagues, Dr. Tripp Hansen, was in charge of our hospital service. We had an unusually busy week that week. More than twice as many patients in the hospital as usual. And for us as doctors, that's a very stressful week. And I ran into him in the hall and I said, Tripp, this must be such a hard week for you. And he said, not at all. As long as I'm the one giving the care and not getting the care in the hospital, I'm happy. And I walked away just so impressed because so many of my colleagues would have felt burdened, and he felt elated because he was able to give to others. And that sort of ability to reframe what is going on in our life has such immense power. Aaron, is that a technique that you sometimes talk about?
Absolutely. And I think that knowing Trip and knowing how much he really cares about taking care of patients in those distressing situations. And I think about, as you said this, we can look at this from one of two ways, right? This can be an overburden of, I have so many people to take care of, but reframing that to what a privilege I get to have of helping so many people. And I think that when we talk about reframing, I think a lot of that is that privilege part of this, right? We are privileged to live a life. And you've heard me say this before. And in order to live a fulfilled life, we should have those emotions like sadness and anxiety. We should also have those emotions such as joy and feeling kind to one another. So we have to shift our mindset and reframe the situation that we're looking at as, you know what, this can be a very challenging time of the year for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And we can help reframe that by what will we like this year to be for us, right? Because we often think about holidays past gone of the things that used to be. And lots of times we feel sad about it. But we can also reframe this right now to, how do I want 2024 to be? And how is my mindset going to help me as I do that?
We move forward. This has been just a fantastic discussion, and I want to thank everybody for contributing all these different thoughts. We only have a few minutes left, and so I'd like to ask each of us to share some final thoughts. Marina, can you go first?
And you've heard me say it before, but I think for me is finding ways that we can start making diabetes your friend and not your enemy. And realizing that it doesn't define you. It is absolutely going to be part of who you are, and it's going to shape a lot of what you do in life. But you're so much more than that. You just happen to have a lazy pancreas, right? But you're so much more than just that chronic condition.
Thanks so much. Aaron, your thoughts.
I hope one thing that listeners get today is this thought about self-compassion, right? Diabetes, it requires a lot of lifestyle adjustments. They can be so emotionally taxing, and self-compassion, it helps to foster this resilience by treating people as we would treat a friend in a similar situation. So as we think about how we would have this conversation with somebody else, let's think about having that compassion toward ourselves. This actually helps to encourage healthier responses, things like improved problem solving, seeking and support, rather than that avoidance and the negative coping responses that come from that.
So important. Sarah?
I just feel blown away by everything we've talked about in this episode. There's just so many new insights into reframing mindset. And I think that, or I hope that our listeners take away from this episode different ways that they can shift their mindset related to both their diabetes, but also their overall life of just finding those ways to be grateful for different elements that maybe are even challenging that are helping you to grow in different ways and to have that self-compassion to continue moving forward.
Thanks so much. I also felt in awe as I was listening today, and I took some really important things away. And Marina, something you started with really struck me that when you were diagnosed, you were told about all the things you couldn't do. How important it is to be able to acknowledge, right? Life is hard. It presents us with immense challenges, and they're not distributed equally among us. But it's not just about what we can't do, that you are not your diabetes. You said it so beautifully. You are this person who exercises, you are a mother, etc. And the importance of being able to thrive with whatever we have going on, being able to find joy. And Aaron, as you said, to have self-compassion, because none of us do it perfectly. We are all growing. That's part of an abundance mindset. I can still grow. I can still get better. And to have compassion for ourselves for those areas in which we don't quite do it, we wish we would. And then, Sarah, as you alluded to, we then move on. We don't have to stay embedded in whatever place we are now. To our audience, I hope this was also helpful for all of you. Thank you for listening. And for the American Diabetes Association, I'm Dr. Neil Skolnik. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next month.